How's everybody doing? Let's see. Okay, now my mic is on. How's everybody doing? This is Jon Croft from Culture Warfare with Jon Croft. We're talking about how to fight the culture war, right? So culture war, we've talked about much of this already. We've defined terms. What is culture war? Culture war is a political term, which means it's about two political forces battling it out for the culture. But it's by using propaganda. This is the tools that political forces use. They use propaganda. So they pay people to say a certain thing. And how is this art? It's not art. So it's also not engaging in culture. So culture war actually has nothing to do with culture. It's a term that comes from the late 1800s when Germany was trying to form national strength. Prussia was the largest part of Germany, forming national strength. Culture war became a term that they used to describe the conservative forces of the church and the political forces of the state battling it out in power, in the circles of power, and in the circles of culture, right, to form a national identity. And the way they did this ultimately was through attacking and hating another people. So just like you're a human being, right, you can gain clout when you're a human being. You can do that by talking about how great you are, describing all the things that are great about you, or you can do that by just telling somebody that somebody else is worse than you. Like we're not maybe great, but those people are really terrible. So basically the Prussians made a national identity through hating the Polish people. And that was where the term culture war comes from. So later on, as you know, we have World War II. The Germans continued to gain national power through hating the Jews. So this is just a continuation of this mindset that a national identity has to be formed through hating some other nation or people. So obviously this is evil, terrible, and wrong. I don't think we should do it. It's a bad idea. So that's just the history of the term culture war. That doesn't mean we're using it this way today, but what it does mean is that the term does not come from culture. It's not about culture. So culture is about, so we'll get into this now, defining the terms of what is culture, right? Culture is a community discussion about what great art, storytelling, and excellent ways of living are affirmed. So you affirm an excellent way of living, you affirm values in your society through your storytelling. So that's how culture is formed. So again, we're defining these terms, right? We're in the world of defining culture, what culture really is. So there has to be not just an artist and a creator, right? A musician, a writer, like a leader, because leaders do play a hand in defining culture. But if a leader is just going to impose this on the people and the people don't want it or they're not interested in it, it's going to cause something like a culture war, right? It's going to cause infighting, which is not about culture, it's about politics. So, again, let's keep defining these terms. So, looks like we have a friend here. Can you hear me?
Now it says that now it has you muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, sweet. It worked, finally. Sheesh. Yeah, so basically all I was doing was defining the terms again because I want people to understand that, first of all, culture war is not a cultural term. Second of all, to engage in the culture, it has to be voluntary, and propaganda is not culture. Um, and so I think I want to go down kind of a roadmap of like, first of all, letting people know that yes, they can engage in culture. Like that's, first of all, like it's an open door. You can engage in culture. And I think a lot of people know this, but how they think of it is social media. They think they think of engaging the culture through social media mostly. And the problem is that's a very distinct kind of filter, right? It's all filtered through these social media websites. So they only allow certain content. It's only shown in a certain way. And so there's these filters that hit us without us realizing it. Uh, People are being muted, censored, changed in front of us, and we don't realize that they can't tell us truly how they feel about the world because of social media platforms. So this also affects culture. So just like how we've talked about how the access media and Hollywood, and how Hollywood kind of like has its own system, right? And so you can't necessarily make whatever product you want, and therefore that cultural message also gets muted and censored and changed. And so freedom really affects this. Like freedom, at least for the first time in history, we literally had a government that could guarantee that you had the right to speak about bad things about the government, as well as bad things about the other guy's religion, as well as bad things about things that in the past you really couldn't do. So it's not that people couldn't speak, right? They could speak about all kinds of things. They just couldn't speak about those things freely. So that was the objective of the First Amendment, is to give us the right to at least do those two things that we couldn't do in the past freely. So then legal precedents got into it, like K courses, court cases, and people began to see, okay, yes, our freedoms really are protected here. We can talk against a religion or a person in power, and we won't get retribution for it. So these are all things that have helped us to have a more vibrant culture, right? So our culture now, and then we have immigration, we have people coming in, and there's a mix-up of more culture. And so there's more freedom for us to experience a variety of cultures, experience a variety of opinions and feelings and, histories and stories. And so I think this is all a good thing, right? It can be a little overwhelming, possibly, for some people. They might be used to a homogenized culture, and then they get hit in the face with a bunch of other people and their opinions. And social media kind of did that again, kind of like how we had the melting pot in America, and we had all these immigrants, like in the 1800s or something. This film Cabrini is about these immigrants, Italian immigrants coming to the States, and they're not feeling represented or whatever, but you're kind of like hit in the face with all these different cultures, so you don't know what to do with it, and they don't know what to do with it. And so it's like social media and the internet kind of did the same thing again, where we got to experience all these different cultural views smacking you in the face. And what do you do with that? So, of course, social media censors people. So they don't know what to do with it. They have a wider range of opinions than they were ready for. And their only conclusion is to turn it off. So, and there certainly are risks involved if you leave it on. So anyway, my point is that we have experienced culture differently through the centuries, and we have participated in culture differently through the centuries. Now we're participating in culture through social media and through other forms of media, films are starting to go out as it comes to their influence, but I still think it's a very vibrant form of storytelling, and culture has traditionally been transmuted through storytelling. For thousands of years, verbally, over the campfire, and through cave paintings, visually, and then eventually it became written, and so writing really enhanced this a great deal. And it isn't just pictures, right? It's also words and numbers and these kinds of languages that we can transfer culture through. So we get to transfer our heritage of understanding math and understanding the stars and understanding what it's like to kill a wildebeest with a spear, right? And then we write these things down in stories, and they become symbolic even too. They become archetypal. They become bigger than life, and they become like things worthy of worship almost, a form of iconography. And so that's what Disney is today. Disney is like a form of iconography, and it's almost a place of worship, right? It's almost like the modern church, And so we have all these symbols, and we have all these languages, right? And we have pictures, and so it's typically it starts with auditory, and then you add the visual cave painting, and you add which are symbols, right? And then you add language, which becomes written. So you had language spoken, now you have language written, and you have drawings, and then you have all these other reproductions and changes of that medium, those mediums, to today, where all the mediums really remain the same. There's added technology on top of them to help transmute them better. The cave paintings become 24 frames per second, right? And then they become a moving image. And so, but really they're just cave paintings, right? So they're just the same visual representation, symbols, things that symbolize something. And at the time, one symbol was enough, like we were absorbing that. And now it's 24 symbols a second. And not only that, they become greater than symbols. They do become a form of living idolatry, like iconography, right? That turns into idolatry because you're thinking, what is this moving thing, right? This is like a living thing. It's like bringing the idol to life, right? So if you're like, all human beings are prone to worship, so nobody's immune to this, right? Everybody's down in the mud with this, And as Christians, we've spoken as Christians before, and so as Christians, we're very aware of this, and so we're intimate with the idea of worship. We're okay with it. It's not an ugly word to us. So we're more familiar with this idea that people worship their cars, and they worship their jobs, and they worship all these things, and they don't think of it as worship. That doesn't sound familiar to them. So they don't think of it as worship, but it really is worship, because you take those things away from them, and what do? They freak out. Oh, you took my job away from me. Oh, you took my kids. Oh, you took my this or that. And so their idols become revealed when you do that. And the same is true for a pagan culture. You took their idols away from them, and they will come after you. So, so a lot of these things just haven't changed through the centuries. They've just kind of, there's new, as the Greeks say, techne, there's new technology, right? So technology became a word when you mix the techne with the logos, right? So you have the logos, which is kind of the written concept. It's like the logical concept. And then you have the techne, the technique, the instrument, the art form, the craft, or the praxis, the practicing of the logos. So you have the logos, the beginning of it, and then you have the techne, the practicing of it. You put those things together, and that became something when we took mathematical concepts like machines, the math required to make a gear in a machine, and then we created it, and that became technology, the Industrial Revolution. So that wasn't a word before then. So technology has morphed and changed into something that's much more like encompassing in our brains. It's very powerful and influential. And so you had these technological advances, and it wasn't just in the Industrial Revolution, right? Those things provided us through resources, with money, and like now you could have a middle class, you could have a more vibrant society that's growing. It's not just the rich and the poor, right? There's a stratification of society. So that's more about resources and economic growth. But what we're talking about is culture, which is more about the logos, really, right? It's more about the concept of things, the concept of your past, the concept of your values, the things that matter to you, that say who you are inside. And when those things get brought into real life, they can become very powerful to us. So, but culture is generally kind of remains this kind of conceptual thing, this story, generally. So the internet has enhanced this as well, made it even more kind of like in the cloud, like our culture's in the cloud somewhere. And so it becomes like this Gnostic idea of, like power that you can reach for, and then hopefully even bring it into reality in some way. But something like Metropolis, which we've talked about Metropolis in the past, Metropolis also kind of has this kind of transformational idea of bringing the logos, bringing this concept of this perfect being or this perfect person or this influential power broker, or somebody the Christians might call the Antichrist, right? Bringing that concept into life through technology, and so Metropolis kind of is one story about that. But undergirding it, right, is a ton of like Gnostic, turning into agnostic history there. So if you read some of Metropolis or see the movie, you'll see some of this. There's a lot of symbology in it, but this is just traditionally how culture is formed, right? So we use these powerful tools, and then these powerful tools kind of shake up society, and then we get to discuss what it's about, like what it means, and how important it is to us. And that's kind of how culture is formed. So, whenever someone wants to impose some idea on you, and then you're not allowed to talk about it and criticize it, that's how you know it's not culture, it's propaganda. So let's talk about then how to fight the culture war. Because it's true, I've talked about what a culture war is, but how I'm using this word now is the actual legitimate making of culture. So I would say this is a personal thing for you. Like, personally for you, if you want to be a creator of culture, you want to participate in the culture, you want to help create culture, you're generally going to be on two sides of the coin. You're going to create it, or you're going to talk about it. And so you can be a commentator, cultural commentator, and what you're there to do is curate for society and for your fan base and for your viewer what you call good content, what you call a good story, right? And so what we need today is curators, commentators who will find new material that's not like the old material, new material that is brilliant and powerful and meaningful, right? It's well made, it's impactful, right? And it means something behind it. And so all of those things are necessary elements for there to be something good to talk about in your community, so that your community can turn that piece of art into a culturally impactful experience for people. And that creates discussions, and that creates, a lot of good vibes about something. You could have a runaway hit of some kind of album or a film or book or what have you. So we need those people a great deal, because that's actually how culture reaches the consciousness of people. It's actually how it becomes real culture, is talking about stuff, having open discussions, having enriching discussions, like why these things matter. And so that's very important to do. So we need people who, the reason I bring them up first, the curators, is because this is something that we need more of, and there's something we can create quickly. Like, we have YouTube, right? You have a resource there you can just use with your phone if you want to. Just create videos with your phone. But you could be talking about good media, good content, good films, good whatever it is you like, right? And then instead of just talking about it to talk about it, or talk about it to get clicks and make money, you talk about it on the terms of what are those three things, something impactful, something meaningful, the third one I almost blanked on. But those kinds of elements are really important to keeping the conversation going, right? And so instead of like just making thumbnails that are clickbaity, right, like on your YouTube, encourage discussions that actually are meaningful. And if they're meaningful, then more people will return to them over and over. And you can return to that same well over and over. Like, oh, I really like this movie, and so I'm going to talk about it. There's people who review movies for like 3-4 hours. One movie, they go over the whole film with a fine-tooth comb. People like Mahler and these other people. That guy's from the UK, I think. But they will talk about a film. I mean, it's like they're making 2 feature films worth of content about one feature film. So it's really kind of amazing and hilarious in some ways. But so I bring those people up first because that's easy. That's easier to do. And I don't mean it's like super easy. Like, to have good commentary and good curation takes some talent. And I know this because I mostly shrink from this because I don't consider myself a reviewer or a commentator or a curator more than an artist. Like, I think of myself more as an artist, and secondly, as, someone who's trying to make an impact in the world through some curation, through Media Moses. But the first person, obviously, that we have to mention, though, is, and I mean, the reason I say first person is because they're actually the ones who create the art, and then that art eventually reaches the curator. But the creation of art is not easy. Like, especially these days with the way content is made now, this billion-dollar machine in Hollywood, they can make very complicated pieces of art. But we are getting tools now, cheaper cameras, right? For example, you could do a lot of things with just a cell phone, and if you're a talented storyteller, you can actually create content that someone else hopefully will curate and will say, like, let's talk about this piece of art. And they might even say, this is not art, or whatever. What, like, in a way, they don't always get to define that. But we need more of those two kinds of people. People who are creating more and people who are talking about that product more. Is there another step or something I feel like I'm missing? What do you think?
No, I think that's a really good point. The creators and the curators.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we create like a fortress of culture. Or I don't know if that's the right word.
I like that.
Like like a library.
Yeah.
Maybe of content and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because you need there is a lot of commentary today, a lot of opinion-based content that's just someone saying, I watched this movie, or I read this book, or I drank this coffee, and this was
right
how I felt about the whole experience.
Yeah.
And as ridiculous as it sounds, it's fascinating. We're all fascinated by it, and we love it.
Sure.
We love hearing someone's story.
Yeah.
And how they interacted with their life. And so yeah, I enjoy like listening to people talk about, I always enjoy positivity.
Yeah.
And encouragement. I'm not like a fan really of criticism, so the kind of curation that I like is someone saying, this was really great, I listened to this, or I read this.
Yeah.
And it really moved me, I was really inspired. It made me think of this other thing, and it led me to this other thing. And then, the curators have this opportunity to kind of weave a story together. Like I know you're currently reading The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And I used to read a lot more fiction until recently, and I still love fiction, but recently I just got to where, my time if I had time to read, I only want to be reading the Bible right now. I know that sounds crazy.
No.
But that's I have such a limited amount of time, I think, to sit and read that I want it to be the book. But when I was reading a lot of fiction, I loved seeing all these things get tied together. Like I would see, whatever it was I was reading would kind of maybe remind me of a show, or it would remind me of a painting, or of a song, or a certain facet of God's character. And so in that sense, you can become this curator who weaves a story out of the content that they're currently digesting, I guess. But ultimately, that's the Holy Spirit. That's the Holy Spirit weaving together and bringing, the story all together to kind of make sense to us and to give us clarity and to reveal God.
Totally. Yeah, and we see, like you were mentioning, there's a lot of reviewing, a lot of curating online. There's also a lot of creation. Like there's a lot of people creating online, and a lot of people who seem to do both simultaneously, which is kind of interesting sometimes to watch. But like they will review something creatively, using their creative skills of explanation or editing or what have you. And so it's like they're creating their own little piece of art, which I think is kind of cool. But here's the problem, is that when there's so much content and so much curation happening, right, what that means is not only do you have an enormous stratification of like different cultures and subcultures and subcultures and subcultures, right? But then you have a not very robust filtering of those things. Because what's going to happen is each subculture doesn't necessarily have a good reviewer to review that work. Because the good creators and the good reviewers are actually far more rare than we like to think that they are. Like, just because you can shoot something with a camera does not mean it's good. And just because you can review the last film you watched with your cell phone does not mean you are good at reviewing. You know, maybe you're just trying to get a few views and get a few fans to like your rantings about movies. That isn't necessarily good curation. And the movie that you're watching could just be made on a cell phone. And you could think this is the most brilliant thing I've ever seen, but it's actually like pretty junky and terrible. So basically, our problem is that just like how before we had a more homogenized culture with Hollywood that's still kind of dangling by a thread and still holding on to its cultural influence, now we have all these stratified subcultures after subcultures after subcultures on the internet, and there's a lack of like skillful curation and skillful art creation. So, you know, if you want to really participate in culture, don't just be the one of thousands of people who have little to no voice and impact on that culture as a whole, right? Instead, become, you know, one of the rules of great competition is you have to be the cream that rises to the top. In other words, you have to focus on quality, not just quantity anymore. Quantity is taken care of by the sheer amount of participants on the field. What you want is quality. So if you're quality, your work will rise to the top because people will have seen so much other junk that when they see your thing, they'll be like, oh, this is different from the thousands of other things. It'll stand apart more. So, you know, it's like that book, you know, Where's Waldo? It's like, oh, you're looking for the red shirt, right? It stands out. And if you and this is good curation, when you're a good curator, your eyes become trained to see Waldo. Waldo is a good film or a good product, right? So that's what it represents in my analogy here. Waldo is a good film. It's culturally relevant. And if you're a good curator, you will have seen things like Waldo in the past. So you'll know what it looks like. You'll know he has the silly hat. You'll know he has red and white striped shirts that are horizontal. You'll know all these things. So it's much quicker and efficient for you, right, to look in a whole big picture looking for Waldo because you'll be able to find him and describe him to other people. But if you're not very good at curation, you'll be like, okay, I heard there was some red in there and some white in there and something else. That's what makes a good movie, right? And so you're looking for maybe good cinematography, you're looking maybe for a good performance from an actor, but you're not seeing necessarily the whole picture of what is good cinema. So just as you become better as a curator, you become, you know, so good at it, you can pick Waldo out after like a minute of looking at that page. When before you were like, I just can't find this dude. You know, or I can't describe why, you know, this is what it is. I just like it. You know what I mean? Like, I like this film. It was fun, or there was a lot of, you know, spectacle, which is, you know, very popular today with the blockbuster movies, right? And the superheroes, it's spectacle, you know. Something Scorsese calls more of a theme park ride than cinema. He doesn't see that as cinema. I agree with him. That's not what cinema is, because cinema existed at a certain time and place It's a certain kind of film. And so superhero films are more spectacle. Um, I mean, you can say this makes it a bad film, whatever. But the point is, we become better with our tastes. Like, we can figure out, okay, that's cinema and that's spectacle. Those are different things. And so cinema is a certain kind of thing. And it makes you think. It's beautiful. It's contemplative. It can probably more easily contain something like values in it. Cinema can. When spectacle is short-lived, like it's like a theme park ride, right? It's going up and down emotionally. It's very emotional. It's chaotic in places, which is exciting. Maybe there's bright colors, which like appeals to your childlike sensibilities. But it's not necessarily thoughtful, doesn't necessarily inculcate values, you know? So all of these factors really play into good curation of art and if art is good or not. So we need more people who are willing to go into all that minutia, you know, research it, write a book or read a book about it. That'd be even better, write a book. But read a book about it or two. And like one of the people I studied to understand reviewing and curation was Jeffrey Overstreet, who's a writer, and I think he's a Catholic from Seattle. I think he's like a Seattle Pacific professor.
He wrote, did he write Aurelia's Colors?
Yep, he's the writer of Aurelia's. Nice. Yeah. And so he's a skillful writer. So he's a bit of an artist himself, right? So he understands some of these things. And then he writes skillful reviews of films. And I learned some stuff about curation from him. But, you know, everybody can find their own way in the discipline or the craft of curation. But for me, I'm really more of an artist. So I like to kind of originate stories that hopefully can have an impact in society. Most of my ideas have been very out there. Most of them have never been made into anything, and except written on a piece of paper somewhere. And so, but I have a strong memory with those kinds of things. And, you know, I also wrote songs for years. I was a songwriter. And so these things are just things I care deeply about. So they stick with me, you know. And so I really get into story structure. I really get into character development. I get into aesthetics, you know, the aesthetics of a good, beautiful film, the composition of that. I get into performances and actors. I think actors are pretty cool. Like, I like a lot of these things. And, you know my history, so it's like, you remember when we worked on our first feature film. Like, you had a very different experience than I did. For me, it was more invigorating. And for you, it was very challenging, I think, right?
Yeah.
It was very hard because there's a lot of opportunities for butting heads with people. Like, there's a lot of that, especially when you have a lot of newbies on set. There's maybe a few egos, right, to navigate around. And so I think you have to really stay focused when you're on a feature. Stay focused on your material, on what you're doing. And then when things go wrong, you have to kind of like go around it, and don't let it get to you emotionally. But that was stuff that really invigorated me and made me feel like I could make films.
Yeah.
Like I kind of thought I could before that, and I was working towards it. I mean, that's why I was there. But like, you never really know until you get thrown into the, you know, the pit with the animal, wild animal. You know, like, is this something I can do? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it was yeah, I think I was kind of lacking in maturity and that point of my life, and it would definitely challenged me in ways I didn't expect it to. Technically, I enjoyed it,
Mm-hmm.
and I enjoyed the job of telling a story
Yeah.
through editing. But I found that I just wasn't good at the social, relational aspect at that time in my life, and uh,
That's okay.
yeah.
That's
And when
okay.
you were talking about what you love in movies, you were talking about aesthetics, and you were talking about acting,
Mm-hmm.
and and it got me thinking of character arcs. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of the character arc. Um, and that, I mean, I certainly have had a character arc in my life.
You character,
um,
you.
you know, where you kind of start off one way,
Mm-hmm.
and the circumstances kind of confront you head on, and you're sort of forced to just reevaluate everything. Um, and I can clearly see that in my own life, and you hope that you can see that in the life of your friends and the people that you love, that they are growing and changing,
Mm-hmm.
and maturing, um, and of course it's ultimately God who does all of these things. You know, whether we're with him or not, he's doing this in our life. He's maturing us and growing us and changing us. And, you know, we can do it with him, or we can resist
Mm-hmm.
and and fight it off and try to do things our own way.
Yeah.
But I love watching a movie or a show um, where you have a character who's maybe doing the wrong thing for the right reason,
Yeah.
and then you're kind of rooting for them, but you also aren't, and then there's some point in the story where you just watch their mind change. You're just watching them, you know, transform, and
Yeah.
you know, a couple episodes later, maybe the next season, like everything has changed for them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just very satisfying. That's just like a very
Yeah.
satisfying process. And so that's probably my favorite thing in a movie. That and maybe
Mm.
writing. I think for the longest time, for me, it was aesthetics.
Yeah.
Um, you know, in my early 20s, my early film watching days,
Yeah.
it was all aesthetics. Like, that was the most interesting thing to me. And, you know, if the movie was confusing or whatever, that's just because it was very deep or it was just written really well.
Right.
But a lot of those movies were maybe more self-indulgent rather than written well, um, as they, you know, as they can sometimes be.
Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
when you have the genre of foreign films and art house films and independent films and things like that, you know, there's so much freedom that sometimes you have a director who just does whatever he feels like doing.
Yeah, you tend to get the directors who focus, right, on certain things.
Yeah.
And so you get the visual director, right, who either shoots himself or he has the same cinematographer and they get the same kind of images and they're just beautiful images. Or you get the actors director who is very big on performances, has often relationships with the same actors over and over. Or you get the writer's director, right? The person who's big into story and they love certain kinds of stories. So, you know, film is just a very complicated medium. So you'll tend to have a director who focuses in one or two areas. And
Yeah.
often that means the other areas can suffer, you know. So like someone like Zack Snyder, he's a very visual spectacle kinds of director, but he's really thin on story. Like, and he's even worse on characters. Like he has almost seems like no understanding of characters.
Yeah.
So like one of the only films he made with like a halfway decent character was the Superman film, and that was and then that character was botched by the end of the film, I think. So
Yeah.
you know, he was the guy who did 300 and you know a lot of these other films that are visually very interesting
Right.
films, but then their stories are often just very weak, not very you know novel or compelling or you know interesting stories. Um,
Yeah.
and then you know like other directors like you do get the ones every now and then like Christopher Nolan, who seems to be good at all of it. Like he's good visually, he's good. Like his only kind of setback is the fact that he's got these strange sound quirks in his films, where he almost is like okay with bad sound. Like
Oh.
that's basically how he talks. But I think that's kind of a smart move sometimes because it gives his films kind of like uniqueness in in a variety of ways. So you know, obviously too, he has great storytelling. You know, often his brother is writing stories with him, and they write the same kinds of stories, and they're always like deep and compelling and interesting. And then obviously he also gets great performances. Like he gets amazing actors and performances. So you
Yeah.
know, this is hard. This is hard to do. This is very hard to do. But like I'm very interested in these things as well. But the difficulty, and this is why I haven't made that much yet, is because the difficulty is making something that's compelling enough that people will support you on. They will watch it, they will enjoy it, they will support you on it.
Mm.
And that's very difficult. So like you have to curate your own work, and you know here's a lot of what people can't do. Artists have difficulty sometimes being self-critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're the wrong kind of self-critical. Um, and I've met many artists who are not even self-critical very much at all, and then of course that basically means they're not going to make good work
Mm.
because they just don't care to challenge their own work in its abilities,
Mm.
and so it just doesn't get challenged. Um, and those same people, because they're not critical of their own work, they're also probably not going to listen to others when they complain. Like they'll look like they're listening, but then they'll change nothing about their work.
Mm.
So I've found that to be actually quite common, especially with like indie filmmakers and kind of small time filmmakers. They're not really processing the feedback from others about what good work is, and they're not comparing their work next to like a major, beautiful Hollywood picture that's gotten accolades. Like they don't compare the two, you know, as apples and apples. They compare them as it's like they give themselves a break to such a degree that they actually don't. And I'm almost the opposite of that. You know, one of the reasons I don't make a lot is because I'm highly self-critical. I tear my own stuff apart. Like by the time it gets to someone for them to read it, I've torn it apart like 10 ways to Sunday. I like, and so generally the criticism I get, I've thought about already numerous times, and I've come to a certain conclusion about that criticism already. So that's often why criticism doesn't help me, is because I've already come to a certain conclusion about that angle on my film
Yeah.
or my story. And so, but that doesn't mean I don't listen, and it
Yeah.
doesn't mean I haven't had good criticism. I have had really good criticism.
Oh, good.
You know, you're a good critic, I think.
Oh.
Um, you do like positivity, which I actually do too. Like I tend to, I'm just not very that way. I'm not that way about myself. Like I'm, I'm, and I'm working on this. I feel like the Lord is helping me with some of this to be a little less self-critical,
Yeah.
and so I can start kind of like um, looking at myself with less of a super critical eye and more of like um, a reasonable level of scrutiny. And so I'm still working on that. Like, but yeah. I mean, people like you, people like my friend Luke, people like a few other friends of mine. I don't know a ton of writers besides myself, though. But Luke is one of them, and he's given me really good criticism before. Um,
Cool.
but what we just I think we just need more. I can see some people disagreeing with me on this point, but I feel like a lot of the reason that because we're speaking at it from an angle of conservatism and faith-based, kind of like a pro-American kind of culture, and especially too like as a Christian, like because I think when our nation was founded, this idea of Americanism was founded, our culture was far more religious than it is today, and so I think we've lost a lot of that kind of spunk to for loss of a better term, as it comes to our enthusiasm about culture and spiritual things. And so we don't really have that as much. We have kind of like a lot of like self-indulgent work, and it's not about things. It's just like about people and how they feel about stuff. It's very subjective. Um, it's not that there's anything wrong with subjectivity and all of that. The slice of life stories are great, but like we need more of this kind of like beautiful objective view of us, our world, our universe, and then like the kinds of stories that can inspire people, right? Because it's like it's not just about the typical human being, right? It's about something that symbolizes more, like a myth, right? It's about something that symbolizes more of like a journey about humankind, not just about one person. And so this is kind of like what Star Wars was. Like some of the stories that we still talk about that are impactful, they're really more mythological than they are just a slice of life, some dude dealing with, I don't know, some typical kind of like journey you're going on that anybody could see, like, and yet Luke Skywalker was relatable. Like, even though he was a symbol of something bigger than just some dude on Tatooine, right? He was also relatable as a regular guy. So I think you want those elements, those kinds of elements, in a story that's going to speak to people again. Something a little bit bigger than life, a little larger than life. Because Star Wars really was about religion. It really was about like a larger than life story, a mythological story about values. So doing that again, and you talked about how you read the Bible, like that's, if you can choose one book you read today, it's going to be the Bible. Like the Bible has a ton of that in it, like a ton of it.
And lots of great character arcs.
Oh yeah, Jonah's great with a character arc, isn't he?
Yeah, so many good character arcs. David,
Mm-hmm.
Esther, overcoming fear.
Yeah, David is so nuanced that I've never even heard of a project about David that attempts to tackle his entire life. Never. It's too big. Like he lived such a big life, from a kid killing a giant to a young king on exile, like, and then he cheated, and cheated against God, and then he repented, and then he's like, and there's numerous of his sons and other, people claiming the throne, and man, so many challenges, and then all the music and the songs, and then his son, like, there was just so much going on there.
Yeah.
What a life! What a life!
It's incredible.
Yeah. So we need. Here's the one thing I was going to say that I think people might disagree with me on. I think the problem with our culture creation is that it's insular. It's insular. It's too subjective and insular. And the reason it's insular is because we don't reach out to community around us, and get like a team of people. Like, you'll see that when people tend to succeed in Hollywood, it's because they either have a strong community around them, or they have a strong family that is pushing them forward and supporting them no matter what. Like, that's really how you become successful in Hollywood,
Yeah.
is by having like an entourage. I don't mean like the show Entourage with a bunch of terrible people, right? I mean like actual people who support you and everything you're doing. There's no, junk behind the scenes. It's just a supportive group of people, right? And so you need that kind of like family behind you, that team behind you. And this is definitely true for film, probably more than any medium. It's the most true for film. But you need to have a group of people who believe in you, who talk up your work, who find the positive in what you're doing. And you talked about reviewing things from a positive perspective, right? Like, you value positivity. I totally agree with that. I think that good critics don't just look at things in the negative. They also train themselves to find the positive. And the reason that's important isn't just because, oh, negative or positive, whatever. It's a binary. No, it's not like that, right? It's easy to be critical. It's easy to just be like, well, I didn't feel right about that.
Yeah.
Like, literally, children can do that. They could be 4 years old and do that. Like,
It's true.
we've seen this. Like, we know. Kids, they reach the certain age or something. It depends on the kid, but they have this point at which they're given so much, and they just keep complaining about stuff. And you're like, why are you just continually complaining about stuff? And so you kind of want to push back with positivity and be like, what good happened today? Like, what good is going on with you today? And so in the sense of reviewers, right, it's understanding, for kids, it's like understanding that life isn't easy, and that when you get something good, hold on to it, right? And that actually often we have something good and we're just not holding on to it. Like, it's right there, but we're just not holding on to it. And so, like, with art, it's the same way, right? When you see a critic who actually knows art, yes, it's true they see a lot of bad art around them, but what they ultimately end up doing is that they find the good and they hold on to it. And so when they're holding on to these good aspects of art, it actually helps them to continue to identify it better, to continue to articulate it better. What is good cinema? What is good film? What's good storytelling? And it also helps guide you on this path of curating, and you can survive better as a curator because you have something kind of like nourishing you, right, as you go along. Like, I live for those particular movies that do this and accomplish this. So you get like 10 bad movies, but if you get that one good movie, it makes you happy, right? So you continue trudging on, but you just kind of want more of those experiences, I think. And you also want to help others, help artists to make better work. And you can't do that by just criticizing them in a bad way. You can't, that doesn't help them to get better. They have to have a direction to go in, right? Every person, when they're trying to do some skill, some craft, some art, they can't just be criticized. And the reason is because it creates this quality where you are stunned and then you don't know where to go. Like, okay, I've made all these mistakes, but now what do I do? And so you have to be given again the baton to say, go again. And now you have to send them off in a direction. And that direction is the positive thing that they're doing. Say, keep doing this thing you're doing. That thing is working. And so now they have something to hope for, something to fight for again.
Yeah.
Because a lot of artists can really be defeated, can feel defeated by the just sheer amount of criticism. And so they get stunned and they become like deer in the headlights. And now they don't. The problem is that this can demoralize them, and then they might even question if I'm really an artist. Like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And frankly, some artists should do that, and they're not doing it enough. But the truth is, so many are just honestly trying, and they honestly put themselves out there, and then people just gut punch them unfairly. And instead what they should be doing is giving the compliment sandwich or something like this. Like, I really like what you're doing here. You know,
Yeah.
it's just this one thing that could improve. But keep doing this and keep doing that and keep doing that. That's the compliment sandwich.
Yeah.
So artists need that more. That's good criticism, right? It's more productive. It's yes, it's kinder. It's true, but it actually works better. That's the point of it, you know. So you're not trying to beat people down, right, and make them no longer an artist. You're really just trying to work with them to maybe look at things a little differently, you know, get a different perspective.
Yeah.
But I'm convinced that what artists need more today is actual community around them that's supporting them. And so when they have a community around them that's supporting them, like, why would you not listen to their criticism too? And their criticism, I think, is going to be even better than the critic, because their criticism is really from a place of real love. You know, a critic can only be so loving to every bit of art that comes across their path, you know. But your community can really, I think, help refine you as a human being too, not just as an artist. So you were talking about character arcs. Like, character arcs come from real life.
Yeah.
Like, it's lived in experience quite often. When you're a writer and you know, it's true, sometimes you get inspired by other stuff you've read or watched, and so you like that character. But like, much of that comes from real life, comes from their own lives, like becoming a better parent or becoming a better friend or something like that. Like, these journeys in life are hard. And, you know, just like how Tolkien took 17 years to make his Lord of the Rings, many artists, they take so long for their art to gestate, you know. But that's often what results from it is better characters, more lived in worlds. Like, so many of these things become just more enriched, you know. And Tolkien could have released that work a decade earlier, and nobody would be talking about it today as a result. Like, it wouldn't have been as lived in, it wouldn't have been as beautiful. Peter Jackson might never have directed the trilogy. Like, all of these things could have happened had Tolkien not spent that extra time to kind of make that work just more beautiful. So these are difficult things. And just imagine if a critic had told Tolkien before he finished this work, oh, you'll never get this done, or oh, this was terrible, therefore you should just stop. Like, you're not an artist, you're not a writer, you've been spending over a decade on this book, clearly you're not a writer. Like, imagine if he'd listened to that kind of criticism. It's nonsense. You know, it's not helpful criticism. So,
well, how do we encourage? How do we become the community that encourages an artist? I have a few ideas.
yeah.
I think we ask them what they're working on.
Oh yeah. Wow.
And then we listen when they tell us their ideas, and then
And then laugh, right?
no.
That's what happened to me one time recently.
Oh man. Well,
Yeah.
maybe it was a comedy. Maybe we laugh if it's a comedy.
All I told them was the title. All I told them was the title for the sci-fi short I had, and they laughed at the title.
Was it me?
No, it was somebody at Film Bar Mondays,
Oh.
my film networking group that I used to do every week, and I still plan to do it
That's
again.
funny.
And by the way, speaking of Film Bar Mondays, Film Bar Mondays is an example of kind of like how you can form a community. Um, you know, it was a, it still exists, but it needs to come back, basically. But social media and the pandemic kind of like cut into that networking group a great deal. And, damaged it in many ways. But what Film Bar Mondays is a film networking group where you go on Monday nights, you go to a bar and you hang out with fellow filmmakers and just talk about your projects, talk about life, talk about you are doing community. You're just like talking, making friends. And you can meet new people and you can talk to a director if you want to talk to a director, or an actor if you want to talk to an actor. And this comes from Atlanta. And so I was up in Atlanta because I have friends that up in Atlanta and film friends. And so I basically borrowed this idea and took it down to Tampa Bay. And then we have been working it for years, and only since 2022 it's kind of shut down. But I intend to bring it back. But that's an example of how community is kind of like supposed to work, where you just make friends with people. And oftentimes what we have had around here in the vein of film community has been like you go to a class where you learn something, like you learn how to break down a script or something. Like you learn all this stuff, but you got to pay them $150, and then the teacher, and then are you gonna actually make community there? Are you gonna actually make friends there when you're there? Like a film festival, right? Like it's a place where you can rub elbows with industry types, and then you go there and nobody wants to talk to you. It's just like, oh, well, that didn't work out.
Well, this is kind of the thing about the film community, is that it can be very, everyone is kind of coming to the table with their own film idea.
Yeah.
And so it's not like there's anyone there who's just showed up for the purpose of helping. Like,
Yep.
hi, I'm just here to help.
I'm here to help somebody.
Like, I don't even
Yeah.
I have 0 movie ideas. Like, that's
Yep.
not usually the case.
No, everybody's got a movie idea, right?
Yeah, but it's true. Like, everyone
It's so
has
true.
Like, anyone you meet, like a stranger you meet, everyone has a movie idea.
It's a trope because it's true. Yeah.
But I wanted to say that, like, one way that we can help this kind of community, or that we can encourage other artists, or that, you were talking about making friends. Well, friends listen to each other.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I think can help with this kind of group is when someone is sharing something with you, you need to, like, pick one thing out of what they just said and then just acknowledge it.
Yeah. Like act like you're listening, right?
Yes, right. And then, but the instinct, I think, is to just say, oh, what they said is making me think of my own thing. Or what
Right.
they said,
Yeah.
I'm waiting for my turn now to talk.
Yep.
When we can completely miss the treasure that's in front of us of this
Mm.
human being, this creative human being that's made
Yeah.
in the image of God.
Yeah.
And so maybe pick something out from what they said and just be like, I liked that. Like,
Mm.
it could be something small. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Just say, I like what you said about how you would make the lighting blue. I think that was a really great
Mm-hmm.
idea. Blue's my favorite color. I don't, just anything. Like,
Yeah.
that shows a person that you're listening. That creates conversation. Um, and that is what supports an artist.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think having those kinds of discussions too is just very, like, I don't know if everybody else likes it the way I do, but like I like, for example, like you were just saying blue light, like I like the way you did that blue light. Uh which I actually have here as a blue light.
You have a blue light.
Yes. It's really funny. But like you know, I think that I like to get like discuss and talk about themes for stories. Like I think themes are interesting, and you can go deep or you can go shallow. Like you could just talk about the lighting if you want to, so long as people understand the lighting is a symbol of a deeper message, you know. And so, you know,
Yeah.
these are things to discuss for sure. And what's important too about community isn't just the discussion you're having in the moment, right? Then what you get to do is show them your work, or you get to, someone listens to you, you listen to them. Maybe you even show up on their set, you know, and you meet outside of the networking group. You go
Yeah.
watch a movie together, like and then you discuss the movie. So like
Yeah, that's
these
good.
are just ways of enriching that friendship and that community.
Yeah.
And so like I you know a lot of those things I tried to infuse in Film Bar Mondays, and some of it worked, some of it didn't work, but it was like it really helped me a great deal to understand what community really is, which is really just kind of like a family away from family that is unselfish in its giving. It doesn't expect anything in return. It just gives in, pays into the community, and it's kind of like a loving extension of your family. And so, in having something like that to give into and pay into, that you don't expect anything from, it's kind of like it's like the whole rising tide raises all ships kind of concept. It's like the whole person who plants trees under whose shade they will never enjoy. Like what they're doing is paying into society in such a way that it's an unselfish giving. And so
Yeah.
this kind of love and affection is, that concept of the person who plants trees they will never live in was an ancient concept. That was something from like the old Greeks or something. So it's like, have we lost so much of our culture that we don't understand these concepts? We don't understand the value of doing that. So we don't understand how you pay into something and then it pays you back in some way, in ways that you don't know and you can never anticipate. In fact, the more you desire it, the less you're going to get it. So you have to like give that up, essentially. But continue to give, right? And I think that has kind of like the way family is, it has its own rewards. So you're giving to your children, and just that you're watching them grow is a reward for you. Like you don't need them to do something for you. Like how could your kids do something for you really? What they're doing for you is responding to your love and affection and your protection and your help to them. And just watching them grow is a reward for you. It's so rewarding.
they're so cute.
That too. So, these are all like aspects of building culture that we need more of, and we want more of. We don't need it in Hollywood anymore. We need it outside of Hollywood. So no matter where you live, you could live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, doesn't matter to me. You could be building culture right now. Form a group where you meet with like-minded creators, and or go on YouTube and go with like-minded curators where you curate content. Make a team of people, make a community where you guys have common interests and you just support each other and build into that community. You keep giving and building into it. You don't expect anything in return. You will get so much more in return than you can expect, if you do that. So that's my message to you. Become a better creator, become a better curator, and build community. So that's today's message on how to fight the culture war. And where can people find you, Rebecca?
Wow, that was a great conversation. You can find me on Facebook and YouTube at Rebecca Loves Jesus, and on Instagram at Jesus Loves Rebecca. And here on X, you can find me at When We Love Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
And where can people find out more about you and what you're doing?
I wanted to ask you, though, didn't you put up a new episode to your podcast recently?
I did, yes. We've done 2 episodes for When We Love Jesus, and the second one is up.
Awesome. Number 2.
Yeah, and I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm here on X as well, Twitter, as at Jon Edward Croft, which is Culture Warfare with Jon Croft. I'm also on Locals at culturewarfare.locals.com, and I'm on YouTube at, I think I'm at Jon Edward Croft on YouTube, or maybe I'm at Culture Warfare. I don't remember. One of those. And you can find my writing at MediaMoses.com. So we're loving the stuff at Media Moses lately. Cabrini's up in theaters. I think just today. Yes. So I plan to see that pretty soon, and write an article or something about it. Maybe we'll talk about it here next week or something. That'll be fun. Awesome. All right, you guys, love you, and stand up for the culture. That's right. Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everyone.